Hello. Welcome to another episode of Industry Insight, sponsored by the Knickerbocker Music Center in Westerly, Rhode Island. We're using this time during quarantine to interview some guests from the music industry, different backgrounds, and sort of learn about what their day to day looks like, how they got involved in the business, and what their advice to other musicians would be from their perspective. Last week, we had Aaron Anderson of Olivia Management in Nashville, Tennessee. Um, and she had a great episode giving artists insight on different ways a manager helps their career and at what point a musician is ready for a manager in their career and how to go about looking for one. So this week, my guest is Jordan Lehning. Jordan is a producer, arranger, and composer in Nashville. And his resume and credits is long enough to fill an entire episode. He's worked with Kacey Musgraves, Willie Nelson, Ray Price, Raylan Baxter, Andrew Combs. The list goes on and on and on. He just has had a really, for a young man, an impressive career already. So I'm really excited to be talking to him today. And if you have any questions throughout the interview, just ask on the comments. And if we have some time at the end, we'll present them to Jordan. So we're just getting ready for him on his end to get set up. So we'll go through that. He's going to be talking about producing and engineering and arranging and sort of the different ways he approaches a record and how you as a musician can approach your own music if producing is something you're interested in. So we're going to go through that in a little bit when Jordan gets on here. And yeah, looking forward to talking to him. He's one of my favorite producers around. So I'll be curious to hear what he has to say about things. Hope you're all doing well out there. This is a really strange time. But, you know, you kind of keep on keeping on, as they say. And, you know, it's really inspiring to see all the different things that people are doing to kind of come together and, you know, making this the new normal, what we're all sort of doing to make things stay normal. At the Knickerbocker, we're putting on shows, we're streaming artists that we can, and more are coming this week that we're excited to share with you. This is one of those ways I thought it would be kind of cool to talk to people in the industry and get some background on, you know, what it is they do and how they got involved. Because the music industry is one of those things that I think a lot of people tend to think it's sort of shrouded in mystery, how to even have a career in the business and what that looks like for people who, you know, have the dream of being a part of the industry, whether it's as a musician or on the business side of things, how you even kind of get started. So I thought this would be a cool way to give some clarity and levity to that. And by talking to people who actually work in the business, you know, share their insight and and whatnot. Because once you're in the industry, you kind of see that there is a lot less mystery than people think, that there are sort of clear ways you can work in it like any industry. And for me personally, I've been involved in the industry in several aspects for a number of years. And there are a lot of things like internships at various companies you can get involved with. And that's a great way to just sort of get your foot in the door and learn and network. Because at the end of the day, it is a business like any other business. And those things like networking, meeting people, internships are, you know, just as important as they are in other fields. So, yeah, I encourage you all to, when this is over, and it will be over, you know, do what you can and get involved in any way you can with that. So just waiting on Jordan here. He's getting set up in his studio to come on, and we'll have him on in just a couple minutes here. What have you guys been listening to during this? That's I've been discovering a lot of artists and albums that I've overlooked or just kind of went past me at different points, and it's been fun to really get into some stuff I'd overlooked, or just, totally wasn't on my radar, and that's been cool. A lot of people are posting, listening to this, or revisiting classic albums, and that's been great. Um, Obviously, it's a weird time to be releasing music, but that's still happening. The wheels of releasing music are turning a lot further in advance, and I think most people realize, but releases are planned months and months in advance, and sort of sent out in the distribution change, certainly digitally. So we're still seeing a lot of good music coming out, and that's been really cool. So I'd be curious what you're all listening to. If you have a good record recommendation, drop it in the comments for me. All right. Well, I'm pleased to bring on our guest, Jordan Lehning, to talk to you about producing and arranging and all the things he's great at. So without further ado, Mr. Jordan Lehning.
Howdy.
Hello.
How you doing, man?
I'm doing well. How are you doing?
Good. Sorry I'm late.
No. It gave me a chance to flex my rambling skills.
Oh, good.
How are you holding up during all this?
We're fine. This is like not that unusual for me. This is kind of the normal. Having the studio here, it's like there's a lot less musicians over here,
Sure.
but we're making it work.
Nice. Well,
Yeah.
that's good to hear. I guess so. Yeah, some semblance of normalcy is great.
Yeah. How are you guys doing?
We're doing well. Doing what we can, and kind of the same thing you said. I have my studio set up here, so I've been, if anything, more productive because there's less distractions and stuff.
Right.
So yeah, I spent a little time talking about all your credits and stuff, and obviously it was short because it'd take me the whole episode to really get into all your credits. But
Mhm.
how did you get started in this field?
So my dad is a record producer, and I sort of grew up in the studio, and he was super helpful and really gracious with. If I ever showed serious interest, he'd sort of double down on that, and if I continue to show interest, that's sort of how it happened. My very first piece of recording gear was an 8-track Tascam 488, which I have the same model of over here. Not the same one, but the same model. And
With the little cassette player?
yeah,
Nice.
yeah, it's awesome.
That's awesome.
Yeah, so that's just kind of I was just sort of front seat, of that whole scene.
So you grew up like as a kid in the studio, basically.
Yeah.
Did that sort of remove the like intimidation of being around, huge artists and working with them?
Yeah, yeah. I mean, for me, it's still. I'm trying to think of somebody that was intimidating that I've worked with. I got to work with Burt Bacharach like
Oh wow.
last year, and before he showed up, I was like, "Holy shit, Burt Bacharach's coming over."
Yeah.
And after he left, I was like, "Holy shit, that was Burt Bacharach."
Yeah.
But really, I think what you're describing is like when the artist shows up, the product is not to sort of swoon over this artist. It's to get something done. They're there to get something done.
Right.
They're there to help do that. So maybe that's because I spent time in the studio, or maybe it's just a work ethic thing. I don't know.
Gotcha. What was that like working with Burt?
Burt is amazing. He's 93, maybe 94 now.
Wow.
But he is sharp as a tack, incredibly kind, incredibly musical. That was the first time I'd worked with anybody that had cared that much about every follicle of a piece of music. I mean, it was amazing.
Wow.
He is the real deal.
And still at it at 94. That's crazy.
Don't give a shit.
Wow, that's amazing.
Yeah.
Do you remember what the first album you produced was?
I mean, um, I'd been recording for so long, and I would record like friends and stuff. So the first thing that I recorded where I otherwise would not have any relation with these people, just didn't know them, was a band I recorded in Boston in 2005 or 4, called Glint, and I responded to a Craigslist ad
Oh,
because
nice.
I it was amazing. I had dropped
Wow.
out of Berkeley and I was living in Boston, waiting tables and playing in my band. And every day I would post like film scoring and producing, and these guys responded to this. And they lived like a couple blocks away from me, and I went in for an interview, and I made their record.
That's awesome. I think I knew that we were up in Boston around the same time.
Were
Um,
you there?
I was up there 2007 for the next 5 years.
I would have maybe just left at that time, but right around that time.
Gotcha. Yeah, it was a good town to kind of be for a while, I thought.
It's a good town to leave, I noticed.
Good town to leave too. That's
Yeah.
funny. Um, is there sort of like a model you kind of take for producing, or I'm sure it's different with every album and song, but like a blueprint you tend to follow?
Um, it's sort of, I mean, a short answer is yes, but the long answer is it depends on how, like, if it's a band, then they've likely already rehearsed these songs. This is honestly why I don't really love recording bands, because you've got a lot of, dealing with one artist is great because you only have to deal with one ego, and you only
Right.
have to really like communicate with that one ego.
Yeah.
And sometimes you'll get bands where the band members recognize that it's really this guy's show, and the producer can still really communicate with one person and you won't piss anybody off. But if it is a band and there's 4 or 5 egos, it's really, really tricky to go the blueprint that I would if it was just one artist. If there's
Gotcha.
one artist, they play me the tune, and you can dream as big or as small as you want to dream, and you don't have to worry about pissing anybody off, you know.
That makes
But
sense.
there's 100 different ways to do it. But I typically like to do, you know, artist plays me their tune, however, on whatever instrument, and we just go from the ground up and pre-pro like crazy, so that when we get to tracking, it's super smooth.
Yeah, that makes sense. On the flip side of that, what are like the egos and sort of roles like when there's a team? So there's a producer, an engineer. Are those sort of like clearly defined, or is there crossover?
Uh, it's clearly defined.
Gotcha.
Yeah, unless if I have a even if I have a co-producer, um, no, I mean, and I only hire nice people too.
Yeah.
I like to hire nice and talented. Even if they're really great, but they're a pain in the ass, I'm not going to hire them. I'm not going to deal with them.
Yeah, and they say that kind of is like, your reputation speaks for you in the business. If you're an asshole, you're not going to get called back for a session.
Not in Nashville, you won't. Yeah.
Well, cool. I was wondering, as like a producer and musician, what are some of your gold standard records that you think are sort of required listening for production and arranging? And
Um. So I think the way to answer this is these are records that I frequently reference when I'm making another record. Purple Rain,
Mhm.
Iggy Pop's Lust for Life, um, Beatles Revolver, Beck, Midnight Vultures, Tom Waits, Mule Variations,
Oh
which
yeah,
came out that same year. Um, I mean, the list goes on of like pretty unbelievable recordings that if I were able to get close to, you know, recreating, I'd be a happy camper.
And in terms of, like, recreating, and I think a lot of those are pretty classic albums that a lot of people would cite as sort of the techniques used, like, tuning the toms in Purple Rain,
Mhm.
um, and all the things like on Mule Variations for sure. Are those things you sort of will bring into projects and take reference from?
Big time. I don't typically dig too deep in how, like, their process. I just sort of try to, what is my experience with that recording, and how do I kinda get close to it in my own way on somebody else's record.
Gotcha. So you're not necessarily, like, going through, like, the books on how those records were made.
No, I'm honestly not like a gear nerd. Uh,
Yeah.
I'm I'm really interested in the experience that the listener has with the product, and I think there's a bit of a danger in, taking somebody else's roadmap.
Sure.
Um, and you might, in trying to do something without a roadmap, you might stumble on some other place that you otherwise wouldn't have gotten to.
Yeah, that makes sense. I mean, it seems like gear is kind of an endless hole you can go down, but if the sort of creativity and the ideas aren't there, it doesn't really.
I just don't like. It seems like with gearheads that there's like a right and wrong way to do it,
Right.
and something that my dad told me a long time ago, and he is kind of a gearhead, is it's not right or wrong. It's effective or ineffective. So I think that just that it's like you can kind of take that and run with it.
Yeah, that's a great quote. I'm gonna throw that up on the banner below.
Yeah.
Um, with it on that same sort of line of thought, I think about like when the Beatles were recording and the gear limits back then, and sort
Mhm.
of George Martin's ability to take those parameters and make these records that even still today aren't often replicated. Do you ever try to sort of set similar parameters so you don't go down the endless possibility road?
I mean, budget kind of does that for you.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Uh, um, I mean, yeah. I did a record on Cree Harrison. Me and Skylar did one recently that's not out yet, but then we did another one a few years ago, and Cree wanted to do it all to tape and all live and all in one room.
Wow.
And we cut it at Echo Mountain. And Cree's the kind of singer that can do it.
Yeah.
But the problem is that she wanted to be in the room with the musicians, and the church is huge. So, Mark Patascia, who's a great guy, really talented engineer, he engineered and mixed that record. He did an amazing job. It's all cut to tape. I mean, we went out there, and that was a limitation that Cree wanted, because I think she thought it sort of brought this soul to the whole thing, which it does. I mean, when you
Yeah.
get musicians tracking to tape, they're on best behavior. Um, and that was a great band. We had Ian Fitchick was playing drums, Eli Beard was playing bass, Jeremy Fetzer
Mm.
was playing electric guitar, Spencer Collin was playing steel, Dave Cohen was playing keys, and Misa was playing acoustic guitar. It was really, really fun, man.
That's
Great.
awesome.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, so when you have that all rolling, you're gonna capture something great.
Right. There's like 6 musicians. And if you listen to that record, I mean, it's so cool for me to go back and hear that album, because there's horns and strings that weren't cut live. There's background vocals that weren't cut live. A lot of Cree's vocals were like during tracking, but we wound up going back and overdubbing on top of it just to get great takes. But I mean, 85% of that record is live.
Yeah, that's amazing. It's funny when you said, there's something about the tape machine rolling that sort of puts everyone on their best behavior. Tucker Martine, a producer up in, Portland, was saying the same thing. He'll have a session, oftentimes he'll just turn on the tape machine, not necessarily recording to tape, but there's something that goes off in your head that the tape machine's on. We better get this right.
Yeah, yeah, he's right. Tucker's awesome. He's a good guy
Yeah, I love his records.
too. Super cool.
Um, yeah, that's interesting. I mean, it's crazy. Like technology has sort of gone up at a rate that I don't necessarily hear in albums. That still the fundamental of albums and a great record isn't largely different than it was
Well, no,
years ago when the technology wasn't what it is today.
I play a lot of this time period. I'll work in the studio and I'll sort of slog off at about 3 or 4 every day and go hang out in the house and I'll cook. And what I find myself listening to is like music from the 40s and 50s
Mm,
and, big band and great, singers of that era. And that shit sounds incredible.
yeah,
It sounds amazing. Like it wouldn't be like, oh, if that came out today, it'd be like, oh, that's nostalgic sounding. It's like, fidelity is amazing on this stuff.
right.
I mean, the mics they made then, that's still what we sort of, look to use.
Oh yeah, they're still the ones people are trying to buy if they can find them, or companies are just making replicas of.
Right.
Um,
No,
it's
I don't know that I think speakers have gotten a lot better, since then there's all this bass information now that you get.
right.
Uh, and I will say, I, I do think records sound better because like I always use Lust for Life if something needs a lot of energy or just soulful. Like Lust for Life is a really soulful record. Um, I will I'll be working on a mix or something, and then I'll pull up Neighborhood Threat or something from Lust for Life, and it's super flat. It's just like,
Yeah,
and because in my memory it's huge and it's massive and it's like, it's making the speakers bleed and stuff. And so again, I think that's a good reason to not use the parameters of the engineer that worked on some record that you love, because in my memory, the record sounds brand new,
right. And yeah, so I guess so much of that is their approach was based on the limitations of the time. And if they were around now, it would all be a different playing field.
Right. Well, yeah, a lot of those guys, Iggy Pop is an exception because he still makes great records, but a lot of those guys that were insane engineers at that time, all that stuff kind of just doesn't. It's not very inventive now.
Right.
When,
But you're right. Iggy Pop is still. Did you hear his most recent record, that song James Bond?
Mm-mm.
You have to listen to it after this. It's definitely Iggy Pop. You hear it and you're like, there's no other person who could do this now, and it's just wild.
Yeah, he's amazing.
I'm wondering about sort of current producers. A lot of them will just kind of get their start in their bedroom, with a simple, setup controller, an MBox interface or whatever, and kind of wind up becoming these sort of, big time deals in their own world, like Phineas with his sister Billie Eilish, kind of just sort of paving this landscape of bedroom production. I mean, certainly in the last decade or so, like Mac DeMarco and all these people. Um, is that kind of where all producers start, you think? I mean, you had a unique sort of upbringing because you had
I had access.
access, right?
Well, the producers, those kinds of producers make dance music. I mean,
Sure, that's different, I guess.
yeah, and that's really, I almost said easy, and it's not easy, but it's very accessible in a bedroom.
Yeah,
The kind of music that I am interested in doing needs not a lot of humans, but more than two.
right.
Um, but it's that approach is totally validated, and there are definitely records that I could see making with that approach, but I would not want that to be the end all. And I would also hate to find myself in a situation where I've done years of that kind of practice and then get into a studio with a bunch of musicians and not know how to communicate to them.
Yeah, that makes sense. And I think a lot of those people have that problem. Like a label will try and put them in a studio and it doesn't work. And they have to kind of like
Yeah.
go back to the bedroom. Um,
Back to the bedroom.
back to the bedroom for you. It is funny because electronic music is so popular, but a lot of that work is so automated. It's kind of like, assigning controls and um,
But
it really isn't
it's
different.
still, it's it should be validated. I mean, it's an art form and it's something that you can totally screw up, so it's easy to get it wrong.
Yeah, no, that's true. What advice would you have to people who are looking to get into learning more about producing and arranging, and whether they're working on their own music or want to record their friend's band?
Um, I would just start by doing it and don't. I think my rate when I started was $100 to produce, $100 to engineer, and $100 to mix per song.
Gotcha.
So to do like a 10-song record full, if you had a band, it would be 3K, which when I started was a shit ton of money.
Yeah.
Um, and I don't know, don't try to overcharge yourself or don't charge it all and try to make something undeniable. There's 2 albums I did with a really close friend of mine named Jasmine Cassett. Jasmine is later became one half of Bird Cloud with Mackenzie Green.
Oh, cool.
And Jasmine's solo stuff is like a total 180 from Bird Cloud. It's just totally different. But that was the first time I really stretched my legs and kind of just did whatever I wanted to do. And Jazz was totally cool. She just let me do whatever I want, and she wrote these beautiful tunes, and I just kind of got to do whatever I wanted to. And I did 2 of her records for free, but I owned part of the master, so that was the deal.
Oh, that's
And
cool.
it took a year to do both of them, but both of those records wound up pushing me forward, just word of mouth, so it's that kind of thing that I wouldn't sit around waiting for somebody to hire you.
Right.
You just have to go just start doing it. And if you find yourself bored, you need to seriously reconsider that as an occupation.
Yeah, right. I mean, that makes sense. The music industry is not a gracious one. So if
No,
you don't want to be here, don't.
no, man. Yeah.
That's cool. I mean, yeah, it makes sense, sort of if you can do it for free for a couple, get a reputation and
Again, those
a portfolio.
records took a year each. So it wasn't like, that's the for free thing. Like, on Mondays, I think her and I would get together and work on it.
Right. It's scheduled around. It's not necessarily the priority.
And I had that was kind of my life for a couple of years. Was like on Tuesdays I'd work with this person, on Wednesdays I'd do this and this. And so my week in the evenings was kind of filled up, and I waited tables in the daytime. And eventually, I do remember there was sort of a fork in the road where I was either going to go back to waiting tables or really put the boots on the ground and try to stir some shit up. And I didn't go back to waiting tables. And
Nice.
I was really broke for about a year and a half. Like if I got money, I still had no money.
Yeah.
And I was, not eating and had no car, had no license, had no phone. It was like Slumville.
Nice.
But I think very fondly on those times.
Yeah, I think you have to do that as an artist. You have to have the hungry years for it all to sort of make sense afterward when you do start.
That should be like the Hunger Years should be a spin-off from the Wonder Years, right?
Yeah, it's just a bunch of broke artists.
Yeah. In the same
Uh, th-
in the same time period.
oh yeah,
Yeah, that's good.
I like it.
I'll work on it.
And also the whole, like, if you're, like, right at that cusp of should I quit my job, and you sort of are willing to dive into it, I think that's also super beneficial for artists, because it forces you. You just have to be
Yeah,
creative, and
no
you
choice.
have to work harder than you would if you had a safety blanket.
Mhm.
Um, well, cool. Hey, Jordan, this has been great. Thanks so much for
Yeah,
joining us and sharing some
thank
of
you
your
for
insight. And
absolutely.
check out Iggy Pop, that song James Bond that came out last year. I think you're gonna enjoy it.
I will do it.
And yeah, we'll see y'all next time on Insight Industry. Industry Insight. Yeah, that's it. All right. Take care. Thanks, Jordan.
See you, man.